Okay, good afternoon everyone. Let's get started. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Yo Antah Pravishya Mama Vacha Imam Prashuptam Sanjeevayati Akhila Shakti Daraswadamna Anyamshcha Hasta Charana Shravanatvagādīn Prana Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam Lasatu Shrimadananda Tirtendurno Hrudambare Yadvajas Chandrika Swanta Santapam Vinikrantati Padavakya Pramana Jnan Pranamya Shirasa Gurun Vyakarishye Yatabhotam Vishnu Tattva Vinirnayam. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining, and good evening and good morning to folks from other parts, India and America. So let's get started. Let's dig in straight into the slides. So what were we doing last week or fortnight ago? So fortnight ago, we started, and we should all pat our backs. We started the third adhyaya. So we started the Chintana of the third Valli of the first adhyaya. And this particular Valli has got some of the most amazing verses of Katha Upanishad. And many of the verses are well worth our time memorizing and contemplating every day of our lives. And I'll tell you why it's very, very useful for us to contemplate this every day of our life, because some of the examples that are given in the third Valli is very, very practical. So what was the first verse that we did last week? Ritam pibantau sukrutasya loke guham pravishtau parame pararde. So this is the first half of the first verse that we spent quite a lot of time, I have to admit. We did spend a lot of time talking about this. So let's get that in context. So Rutam, so the word Rutam, we spent a time thinking about the word Rutam. What is Rutam? Rutam is Yatartha Jnana, or the Ananda that we get from Yatartha Jnana. Yatartha Jnana is knowing things as they exist in themselves. That is Yatartha Jnana. And having true knowledge always gives us happiness. So that is a Rutam. Yeah, whereas Satyam is the practical application of Ritam is Satyam. So we need to distinguish this. These are subtle differences between Ritam and Satyam. Ritam also means quite a few other things. It can mean something which is changeless is a Ritam. Something that is known through the Vedas is also Ritam. But primarily Upanishads, when they talk about Ritam, they talk about Ritam as Yatartha Jnana. So this Yatartha Jnana gives Ananda, and this Ananda is enjoyed by two individuals, Rutam Pibantav. So who are these two individuals and where are they? These two beings are in the Guha, Guham Pravishtav. What is that Guha? Parame Pararde. Parame Pararde. Parame means we all know, supreme or Sreshta. Pararde, split it again into Para and Arda. Arda is Riddha. Riddha means house. Aruddha means a very good house, a very beautiful mansion. Para Arde. So this Paramatma's abode is the meaning there. When I say Parame Pararde, what are they doing? Ritam Pibantav. Where are they? They are in this Guha. Where is this Guha? Sukrutasya Loke. Sukrit means those that have done good karmas. They eventually reach a Loka. What is that Loka? Is the human body. So human body is the sadhana sarira. So when I say Sukrutasya Loke, it means human form of existence. But at the same time, Sukrut Asya Loke also means this Chaturmukha, Mukhya Prana, who are the purest form of jivas that exist. And for example, Vayu or Mukhya Prana, he is also called Prana. He's got 5 forms, which we will be dealing with in this class and hopefully subsequent classes. Prana, Udana, Samana, Vyana, Samana, and Apana. So these are all the 5 forms of Prana. And inside that 5 form is the Supreme Being as Antaratma. Yeah, so that is also one interpretation or the meaning that we get when Yama says Sukrutasya Loke. And we also saw some evidences as to why these two Guham Pravishto, these two individuals are called Atma and Antaratma. Atma is that aspect of Brahman that pervades the material universe, including our material body. And Antaratma is that name given to Brahman who is inside the Jiva. Okay. Atma Antaratma iti harir eka eva dvidastitaha. Nivishto hridaye nityam rasam pivati karmacham. So says Brihat Samhita. Acharya then also says, when it says Rutam Pibantav, these two fellows, Atma and Antaratma, they enjoy the good deeds of souls. And we spent a lot of time talking about this. And Acharya gave us a clarification. They're saying, Shubham Pibantav asau nityam, na shubham saharihi pibet. Okay? And we had a lot of discussions about this fortnight ago. Go back to those slides for your own revision. So the new verse for today is, so when Yama has said, Ritam Pibantau Sukrutasya Loke Guham Pravishtav Parame Pararde, he then says, who is this Brahman who is inside me as Antaryami? What does he do? Chaya Tapo Brahma Vido Vadanti Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketaha. Okay, so this is quite a cryptic verses, couple of lines, but once you open it up, you get wonderful meanings out of this. Okay, it takes you to the whole, the anatomy of the Vedic sacrifice is what Yama is taking, because in the Vedic times, in the Upanishads times, there are all these fire sacrifices that was going on. So let's look at Chaya Tapo Brahma. So who is this Brahman? The Brahman is described as Chaya Atapo Brahma. Okay, this Brahma does two things for souls, and it does two things for the careers of souls. And what does this Brahman do? Chaya. Chaya means shade. Atapa means intense heat, sun. India is going through a heat wave now. Sun, 45 degrees. Yeah, heat. So intense sun. So Brahman does two things. For those that follow the pathway, the path towards Shreyas, he gives them the shade. He gives them the pleasantness. He gives them the ananda. He becomes their shade. Whereas those that follow the prayers, eventually he gives them intense sun, or the jivas are actually suffering in samsara. That exactly what is the meaning there. Okay. So Chaya Tapo Brahma. Okay. Vido Vadanti. So Vido means the knowledgeable. Vadanti, they say. Who are the knowledgeables? So then that also Yama clarifies in these verses. And again, that is why I keep saying when we read Upanishads, we need to watch the words and the sequence of the words very carefully. So Chaya Tapo Brahma Vido Vadanti. What do the Brahmavids say about Brahman? And how do these Brahmavids became knowledgeable? Because they did Panchagneya, Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketaha. Because these knowledgeables are the ones who do all these fire sacrifices, Trinachiketa fire sacrifice, Nachiketa fire sacrifice, Panchagni sacrifice, and so on. So such knowledgeable people describe this Brahman as Chaya Atapa, and this Brahman is the Antaryamin who is inside all the jivas. Okay, so that is the sense of this verse. Ritam Pibantau Sukrutasya Loke Guham Pravishtav Parame Pararde Chaya Tapo Brahmavido Vadanti Panchagnayo Echa Trinachiketaha. So the third line is, now we are quite familiar. We understand the third line. Brahma, Chaya, Tapo, Vido, Vadanti. But the next line seems a little complicated. Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketa. What is this Panchagni? What is this Nachiketa Agni? Let's look at this a little bit in detail for the next 15-20 minutes, because this is a key concept of Vedic philosophy. Agni. So we know Agni is an easy word. Agni is fire. Pancha Agnayo. Pancha Agnayo means 5 fires. Okay. So this is interesting. What are these 5 fires of the Upanishads? Yeah. So what are the 5 fires is the question here. Okay. So what are the 5 fires? So we go to our Hindu temples here and we do Havan. And friends in US and India, of course, they have more access. For folks in India, they have more access to fire sacrifices, and they seem to be doing this fairly regularly. But do we all actually really understand what is the anatomy of a fire sacrifice from a Vedic philosophical perspective? So I'll take you through this over the next 10-15 minutes. So fire pits. So in Vedic sacrifice, you have the kundas, right? You have the fire pits. But in traditional Vedic sacrifice, there are 5 fire pits. Okay, what are those 5 fire pits? Garhapatya, Ahavaniya. There's something called Dakshina Agni, which is also called Anvaharya Pachana. So these are the 3 main homas. Then you have Upahomas, Pranita, Avasatya. So these are the 5 fire sacrifices that are very important in the Vedic times. And there are versions of this that we do these days in our modern temples. Although our purohits who do the havans do not actually explain to us what they are doing, we just seem to be throwing stuff into the fire. What our Upanishad seers want us to do is understand the fire sacrifice as how it should be done and what are the fire sacrifices. So there are 5: Ahavaniha, Anvaharya Pachana, Garihapatya, Pranita, and Avasatya. So these are the 5 Agnis. And you may ask, why did our Vedic rishis did 5 Agnis? They could have had 3 kundas, they could have had only 1 kunda, or they could have had 6 kundas or 7 kundas. But they chose to have only 5 kundas for the fire sacrifice. So I'm going to break there to open this up for discussion. So why do we think our Vedic rishis had 5 kundas for fire sacrifice? So who wants to come here and contribute, please? Any takers for this?
Although is it because of the Pancha Pranas?
Yeah, thank you, Sushrut. Yeah, some clues are there in the slide. Any other? So yeah, Sushrut is absolutely right. So the 5 in Vedic philosophy, 5 is a very important number. It really is an important number. As Sushrut ji mentioned, 5 pranas, but it is not only 5 pranas. In the subsequent slides, I'll also talk to you about various other 5s that is there in the philosophy of Vedas. Yeah. So 5 pranas. Prana Agnis. Yeah. So these fire is what? It's something that gives volition, isn't it? Something that is energy, that is the heat, the energy. Those are all the ideas that we get from Agnis. And in our bodies, for example, there are 5 different types of fires or volitions or energy. Prana, Udana, Vyana, Samana, Apana, all 5 forms of Mukhya Prana as described in the Upanishads. So that is one direct link as to why 5 kundas are there. Okay. Of course, in our modern temples, nobody bothers to have 5 kundas. Having 1 kunda itself is a bit too much in the modern days. But ideally, a Vedic sacrifice will have 5 kundas. Okay. So Panchagnaye, Yecha, Trinachiketaha. So Trinachiketaha, we have done it in the tail end of the first valli and the second valli of this adhyaya. And let me give you a brief look back on this. Loka Magnim Tamuvacha Tasmai Ya Ishtakaha Yavatirva Yatava Trinachiketaha Tribiretya Sandim Trikarma Krit Tarati Janma Mrutyuhu Trinachiketaha Trayametad Viditva Ye Evam Vidwan Chunute Nachiketam. Okay, so these are all key verses that we have done before about Trinachiketa sacrifice. What is the Trinachiketa? We looked at that contemplation of Brahman in 3 aspects. One is in Kunda, external world. One is in Pinda, our body, and one is in time. So when we looked at Trinachiketaha, we looked at Kunda, Pinda, and Kala, for example. And in Kunda, we discussed about 360 bricks that were used to build the Kunda. Yeah, 360 bricks. And in the body, it is 360 ribs. And in the Kala, it is 360 days. And in this 360, in this fire pits with 360 bricks, in this body with 360 ribs, and for 360 days, morning, afternoon, and evening, what are we supposed to do? we are supposed to contemplate this Brahman in the fire sacrifice. Yeah, so that is what the Vedic people used to do. Now we don't even have time for 5 minutes to think about Brahman, but that is what the Vedic Rishis used to do. 5 kunda, pinda, kala, morning, afternoon, evening, or the contemplation of Brahman, the complete surrender of Brahman as per the instruction of the Vedas to conduct one's life. Yeah, so we looked at all these concepts when we did Nachiketa, and that is what Yama is bringing in, because this Nachiketa sacrifice is one type of Panchagni sacrifice. Okay, it is just one way of doing it. So that gets a bit more complicated. That is for another day. But all that we need to understand from this verse is this Nachiketa sacrifice is a type of 5 fire sacrifices. So in each kunda, you should contemplate 360, 360, and 360. And in 5 pranas, you need to contemplate this. Okay, so that is Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketaha. So let's open this up a little bit more. So we understood Chaya Tapo Brahmavido Vadanti. So Panchagni, Trinachiketa is a type of Panchagni Vidya. Pancha Agni, Agni is fire, which is the most suitable form of contemplation of Brahman. And I put a quiz there or a question mark there. Why is the fire the most suitable symbol for contemplation of Brahman? Who wants to take this one? Why is fire the most auspicious symbol of Brahman?
You mentioned this, Madhuri, and Devalji also last time. I think it's the Agni which takes the body in the last stage.
Yeah. So,
and Jnana Agni takes the, knowledge takes the, many Agnis are there, but that's also a sort of, I thought, Agni, Nyana Agni, which burns the ignorance from us.
Yeah, thank you, Manju, Sheila-ji. Pragnesh?
Because it is Urdhvagami, it's the flames are always uprising.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yes, somebody in chat. Purity. Kavita says purity. Very good. Thank you, Kavita ji. Yeah, so all those ideas are quite apt in this discussion. So Agni is the purest form of worship of the Supreme, because Agni signifies purity. Agni signifies light, as Pragnesh ji mentioned, is always Urdhva Mukha. It's always upward, so that it always lifts you, it gives you knowledge, it lifts you up. And of course, in the Parama Mukhya Vritti, we have done this etymology of the word Agni of Agni Sukta, for example. Agni, Aga plus Ni, and if you start breaking it open, Agni primarily means Narayana, Vishnu. Agni is Agni Narayana in the primary sense. Of course, there are other Agnis, Pradhana Agni. The Pradhana Agni that we have, we think Agni Devata, he is 15th rank in the Vedic pantheon. Kala Agni Rudra is the 5th rank. Prana Agni, Mukhya Prana is the 3rd rank. Chaturmukha and Mukhya go together. Kala Agni Durga is 2nd rank in Vedic pantheon. But in the Parama Mukhya Vritti, when I say Agni, I mean Agni Narayana, who is the Supreme Purusha. And as we have seen, that is why the Rig Veda starts with Agni Mile Purohitam. So the word Agni is very important. And that is why we worship Agni, because that Agni is not only a symbol of purity, knowledge, etc., but that Agni is a worship of the Supreme Brahman, who is Vishnu or Narayana himself. So that Panchagni, then that word will remind us as to why Agni is there. Then why Pancha is there? 5. So this particular slide actually gives you an overview of why 5 is very important in Vedic philosophy. So let's look at the Vyuha forms and the Mula Rupa forms of Narayana. Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, Narayana. 5 forms. Okay. And Agni is what? Narayana. And what is Panchagni? 5 forms of Narayana. What is that? Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, Narayana. So these are all the contemplations. Now, look at the kundas. We have just seen Ahavaniya, Dakshinagni, Garhapaitya, Pranita, Avasatya. Look at our own body. We have 5 koshas. We have 5 Nyana Indriyas and we have 5 Karma Indriyas. So let's open this up for contributions. So who is going to name all the 5 koshas that we have? Who wants to take that up?
Madhuji, I can tell.
Yeah, go for it.
Annamaya, Pranamaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya, Manomaya. The order may not be right, but the 5 koshas.
Yeah, very good, Padmajaji. Yeah, so you got all the 5 koshas. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manonmaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya, in that order. Yeah, perfect. Well done. 5 Jnana Indriyas. So who is going to talk about the 5 Jnana Indriyas? You can just take your look at your own face and then tell us all the 5 Indriyas. Pragnesh.
Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin.
Very good. So 5 Jnana Indriyas. 5 Karma Indriyas. So who is going to take 5 Karma Indriyas? Okay, I'll do that. Vak, Pani, Padam, Upastha, and Payu. Payu and Upastha. So the 5 Karma Indriyas. Okay, so in the body, 5, 5, and 5. Look at that. Again, it's 5. So the contemplation is in this 5 koshas are the 5 forms of Brahman. So when you look at Taittiriya Upanishad, in the second Valli of Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahmanda Valli or Brahma Valli, and in the Bhrigu Valli, there is a whole, there is an onslaught of discussion around the koshas, Annamaya, Manonmaya, Pranamaya, and so on. And the contemplation is the various forms of Aniruddha, Sankarshana, Vasudeva, Narayana, and the 5 forms of Brahman. And that is what the Taittiriya Upanishad talks about in the koshas. Okay. And again, of course, as we said, the pranas, there are 5 pranas. Prana, Udana, Vyana, Samana, and Apana, the 5 forms of Mukhya Prana are also there in this body. Look at the Kala, the seasons. Yeah, we've had this conversation a few weeks ago. The 5 Ritus. Primarily, there are 5 Ritus. Some say there are 6, but actually there is only 5. What are they? Vasanta Ritu, Grishma Ritu, Varsha Ritu, Sharad Ritu, Hemanta, and Shishira. Hemanta and Shishira are usually combined together, the winter season. Okay, 5 seasons. Again in Brahmanda, 5. And look at in Brahmanda how this whole universe is made. 5 Tanmatras and 5 Bhutas. So who is going to take up 5 Tanmatras and 5 Bhutas here? Who wants to go for Tanmatras first? Deep meditation. So Shabda, Sparsha, Rasa, Rupa, and Gandha. So these are the 5 Tanmatras. And the Bhutas, we are all familiar. Yeah. Akasha, Vayu, Tejas, Ap, Annam. So 5 Bhutas. So if you look at the Vedic philosophy, all that is there in the universe, everything, the whole of existence is comprised of the number 5. And in that 5 is this 5 forms of Brahman. And the contemplation there is this Brahman is everywhere. So that, as I've said, if somebody says, what is the Vedic philosophy? We say we believe in a conscious entity or a super conscious being that has pervaded the whole of existence. Yeah, that is the concept of Brahman that we have. And that is what, again, Taittiriya Upanishad says. So what does our Brahman do? So akamayata. Bahusyam prajayeya iti satapo atapyata sa tapastaptva idam sarvam asrujata yadidam kincha tat sruštva tadeva anupravishata. Okay, these are all key words of Vedic philosophy, where the Taittiriya says that this Brahman said, okay, let me create, and he created a lot of things, and in all the things that he created, he pervaded. Tad eva anupravishat. So these are all clear words. Tat shrishtva, tat eva anupravishat. So he pervades everywhere. And this whole creation is what? Creations of various 5s. And that is why this universe is called Prapancha. Yeah. So this Prapancha, Panchavido Vedaha Prapanchaha. So there are 5 differences and there are 5 everywhere. And there are these 5 forms of Agni Narayana that is there. And hence, Panchagnayo Yecha Nachiketa. So when Yama puts that key word, it is it is our duty to contemplate what is that Panchagni all about. Not just mere fire sacrifices and we walk away. No, we need to dig deep and understand what is the upasana there, what is the philosophy there, what is the worshipable concepts there about the Brahman. Yeah. So Chaya Tapo Brahmavido Vadanti Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketaha. Okay. So this Trinachiketaha we have just discussed, which, as I said, a type of Panchagni Upasane in Kunda, Pinda, and Kala. Yeah. So we have done this beautiful verse. So Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketaha Tarati Janma Mrityuhu. Okay. So that is what the Yama has said in the previous verses. Whereas here, Panchagnayo Yecha Trinachiketaha. Whereas in the previous verse, he said, he who does Nachiketa Agni Tarati Janma Mrityuhu, he crosses the samsara cycle, is what Yama has told us before, and he is going to say similar things again. Okay, so here is the key philosophy of how the interpretation, how the scientific rational interpretations of what is this Ritam Pibantau actually means. Yeah, that this has plagued the thoughts of several acharyas who have done lots of bhashyas on that. And as I said, Brahma Sutra has actually given a sutra here, Guham Pravishtav Atmanauhi Taddarshanat. And our forefather, our founding father, Vedavyasa, has actually resolved that issue, saying that when it is said Ritam Pibantav, the two are the two forms of Brahman, Atma and Antaratma. Why has he said that? And as I've always said, when we read Upanishads, we don't just pluck the verse and then interpret this. We always interpret in context. So what is the context here? We should go to the previous verse and the following verse and see what is being described. So what was the previous verse? And we discussed this beautiful verse before. Yasya brahma cha kshatram cha ube bhavata odanaha mrityu rasya upasechanam kayitta veda yatra saha. So yasya brahma, it is in singular. Okay. And then here, Ritam Pibantau, it is in dual. And then what Yama immediately comes is, in the next line, he goes into singular. Yaha setu rijananam aksharam brahma yat paramam. Yat param. Yeah, it becomes singular. So when you have these two verses, the previous verse and the following verse, they talk about this Brahman in singular form. They talk only about Brahman, both. So there is a rules of interpretation called samdamsha. Okay, this is for those who are interested in these aspects of polemics of what it means. Samdamsha means if there are previous verse and the following verse, they talk about Brahman, and the verse in between, that verse that is sandwiched in between, must also talk only about Brahman. Yeah, so that is interpretations of Vedic scriptures. And that samdamsha here is in dual, therefore it talks about two forms of Brahman. Okay, so these are logical scriptural interpretations. That is, as I said, we don't have to dwell too much into these ideas, but there are some schools that talk about the two is mind and the jiva, and somebody talks about jiva and paramatma, and the other schools talks about two forms of paramatma. And the two forms of paramatma makes logical sense because of samdamsha, interpretations of scriptures. So Ritam Pibantav, two forms. Panchagnayo, 5 forms. But God is not formless. We have all agreed from last week that he has infinite non-material forms. And in jivas, and there are infinite jivas out there, right, in the universe. And in the infinite jivas, he is there in each jiva in a unique form. But there are also infinite forms of Brahman, but there is no difference between these forms that are there in individual jivas. And the evidence for that comes from the Rig Veda with this famous verse, Rupam Rupam Pratirupo Babhuva Tadasya Rupam Pratichakshanaya Indro Mayabihi Purarupayate Yuktahi Yasya Harayaha Shatadasha. This is a famous Rig Veda 6th Mandala verse that talk about the infinite forms of Brahman in individual infinite jivas as their Antaryamin and controller. Okay, so let's move on. So what is the next verse saying? The next verse, so such a Brahman who is inside me if I contemplate on him and if I become a Brahmavid, what actually happens to me? What does he do to us? Yaha setur ijananam aksharam brahma yat paramam abhayam titirshatam param nachiketam shakemasi. That's the next verse. So what does that mean? So yes setur ijananam. So that's an easy word. Setu means a bridge. Yeah, so we know Setu, we've heard of that word. Setur is Yaha, this person, Setur, Ijananam. So he is the shelter, support, refuge for those who do yagas in praise of him. Ijananam, Ijananam means sacrifice. Setuhu, bridge. Yaha, the supreme person, is the support, shelter, refuge for those who do yagas in praise of him. What type of yagas? Panchagnayo yecha trinachiketaha. So that is the logical sequence. Look how Yama is giving a logical explanation of the Vedic philosophy here for us. So those who do this Panchagni Vidyas, for them he becomes the shelter, support, or refuge. Who is this person? Again, our friend Yama is reminding us. He is that Aksharam. He is Brahma. He is Param. So look at these three key words that he has used. Again, we have done endless times. Aksharam of chapter 15. We have done million times there. We have said Aksharam primarily means Vishnu or Narayana. Kutasto Akshara means Chetana Prakriti. And Ksharas are who? Fellows like us who have this material body and going through this endless cycles of samsara. Okay. Brahma is what? We know all this. He who has got infinite auspicious attributes. That is what Brahma is. Param means what? We know what Param is, supreme and Sreshta. So our Guru Yama here is, as I said, he is in deep contemplation. He is in such an ecstatic mood. He is actually describing it to Nachiketa, saying that if you do this sacrifice and you contemplate and worship this Brahman, he becomes your refuge. He becomes your bridge. And that person is this Aksharam, Brahma, Paramam. And then he says, Abhayam titirshitam param nachiketam shakemasi. So what does that mean? Abhayam. Bhayam means fear, right? Abhayam means what? Fearlessness. Fear is what? Samsara. Who here, if anybody is fearless, please raise your hands and explain, because I don't think any of us are fearless in samsara. Samsara is full of various types of fears, period. That is the definition of samsara. It is bhayam. It is full of fear. Whereas this Brahman is the fearless shore that you reach. Yeah. For those who have a desire to cross over, he becomes that fearless shore. Nachiketam. So here you have to understand, Nachiketam there means not Nachiketa. Nachiketa means that Nachiketa Agni, who is being worshipped in that Nachiketa Agni? It is this Narayana or Vishnu. So the Nachiketam is that Brahman, Vishnu, who is worshipped in the Nachiketa Agni sacrifice. And then he says Shakemasi, Shakemahi. Shakemahi, literally what it means is, Yama, as you know, is a very exalted devata of the Vedic pantheon, whereas those of us who are in the satsang, we are nobody in the grand scheme of things. We are not even dust. We are just nobody. It's a fact of life. We are nobody with very, very limited little capacity to do anything. Even that capacity, we are not independent. We are dependent on the Supreme even to do anything. So that is our unfortunate state. But what Yama is saying is, I know so many other things about this Brahman, yeah, but I'm explaining to you the greatness of Brahman as per your capacity. There is only so much that each of us can assimilate. I can never be an astrophysicist and attempt to understand the science of astrophysics. No, I don't have the capacity. Okay. Whereas if somebody asks me about, say, for example, oncology or some research, I might be able to explain something. So I have my own limited capacity. So similarly, Yama says, I know a lot more about Brahman, but I will teach as per your capacity. And he goes on in this journey of giving the Upadesha to Nachiketa. Remember, we are doing the third vara of Nachiketa, the third vara that he had asked. So Now we go to one of the most beautiful verses of Katha Upanishad. These are very, very popular and famous verses. I think we should spend a couple of weeks talking about this. Let's see how it goes for the next 30 minutes or so. So this chap, this Brahman, yes, he is, he is the Setu, he is Aksharam, he is Brahma, he is Paramam, he is Abhayam, and it's all well and good. Understanding the theory of it as to how big this Brahman is. But then the key practical problem for us is, how do we even think about reaching this? He has said, Titirshi Param, you can cross for those who are desirous. For those who are desirous of getting rid of samsara, you can cross over to the other side and be on the fearless shore of Brahman. But how are we going to do this? The theory is all fine, but how is practically this is going to happen? How is it going to work? So in the subsequent few verses, our Guru Yama takes through some beautiful verses. My sincere request is that we should memorize this. Yeah, I think it'll do us all a lot of good to just memorize this and think about it every day of our lives, because every day of our lives we are sitting in this car. Yeah, I don't think we are riding horses these days, except a few who may be having platinum jubilee. All of us are on the cars. Yeah, so we are going through cars. So every day we do this. So every day we sit in the car. I think we should think about this. So what is Yama saying here? Atmanam ratinam viddhi, shariram ratamevatu, buddhintu saratim viddhi, manaha pragraham yevacha, indriyani hayanahuhu, vishayanteshu gocharan. Atma Indriya Manoyuktam Bhukte Riti Ahur Manishinaha. Okay, so this is the verse. Memorize this. Excellent verse. So what does it say? So let's go from line 1 to line 3 first. Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi. Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi. So he is taking an example of a chariot. This is our body. We view this body as a chariot. Or if you want, you view this body as this car. So I've just put this on the right side. If you want to view this body as a car, fine. If you want to view this as a chariot of the Vedic times, that is also fine. So in this, what are all the various components of this chariot? So you have a rider. So there is a rider on the chariot. Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi. So the soul is the rider of this chariot, which is this person who is sitting in the back as the passenger. Okay, in the car example. Sometimes the passenger also becomes the driver, but this is the example here. So the rider, Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi. Shariram Ratamevacha. This chariot is this body. So we are this body. This body is this car. Okay, this body is this chariot, and in this chariot is this passenger, who is the soul. That is the primary philosophy of Vedas. That is, the body is different, the soul is different. The soul is just journeying through life. It is journeying through eternal lives and births through this vehicle. This vehicle is this body. So that is key concept that we distinguish. We are not this body, soul and body. And that is what Krishna has done in Sankhya Yoga of chapter 2. He has gone into great detail and he has taken so much effort to convince us that we are not this body. That is the first step. If we don't accept this, there is no point in talking about Vedic philosophy. We are different, the body is different. And that is exactly what our Guru Yama has said. Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi Shariram Ratamevatu. Buddhim tu Saratim Viddhi. So in this body in which you are there, your intellect is the charioteer, okay, or the driver of this car. Okay, your intellect, the higher faculty of the mind that you use to do your transactions of life, that is the intellect, and that intellect is the charioteer. Okay, So what is this charioteer doing? Buddhim tu saratim viddhi manaha pragraham yevacha. So pragrahas means these reins that come from the horses, the individual horses, and you have these reins. And what does the charioteer do? He holds the reins and he controls the horse using that reins. And our Yama says, you know what, when you sit in the chariot, the reins are like your mind. Manaha pragraham yevacha. So in your car, it is the steering wheel. The steering wheel is the pragraham there. The driver is your driver is the intellect. So if you are in an Uber taxi, that is a good example. The Uber taxi driver is the intellect. He is holding the steering wheel, which is the mind. So manaha pragraham yevacha. Indriyani hayan ahuhu. Beautiful. So the Indriyas, the 5 Nyana Indriyas is what Yama is talking about. The 5 Nyana Indriyas, look at 5 horses there. Okay? They are not there as a beautiful painting. They symbolize the 5 Indriyas, the Nyana Indriyas. So these Indriyas, the 5 Indriyas, because Jnana Indriya is important for our sadhana. That doesn't mean Karma Indriyas are not important. They are also important. But these are Jnana sadhana. So these are the instruments that we use to get knowledge. Yeah. So that is why the 5 he is given here as horses. Indriyani hayan. Hayan means horse. Yeah. So Indriyani hayan ahuhu. So these 5 horses are your 5 sense organs. And what are these 5 sense organs doing? Vishayan Teshu Gocharan. So these 5 horses are going towards various objects of their interest. Okay. This is the position of souls. And this 3 verses essentially summarizes what we are. Yeah. So who we are and how have we come and where we are going. All those things are answered in these 3 verses from where I look at it. So when he says, so Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi, Shariram Ratamevatu, Buddhim tu Saratim Viddhi, Manaha Pragraham Yevacha, Indriyani Hayanahuhu, Vishayan Teshu Gocharan. So remember these 3, because 3 lines, just memorize it as I've said so many times in this session, because we are sitting in this car every day. Yeah, now our body is this car, but when we go to work, we're sitting in this car. And every time you sit in this car, instead of listening to this useless news, let's think about this Katha Upanishad verse. Yeah, listening to news will not take us. It is a path to prayers. It is not a path to shreyas. When we are on the car listening to some, purposeless music or news or discussion, that is all prayers. It is not taking us anywhere. But if we take Yama's view, when we sit in the car and we start thinking about our own, this car and this body, put some lectures, put some upasana of some acharya speech or somebody and listen, and that becomes a shreyas. You can use your car as a path to shreyas, and at the same time, you are also using your body as a path towards shreyas that Yama has talked so much about. Yeah. So I hope this is very clear as to how Yama is approaching this problem as to the journey of souls. Yeah. Using an example of a chariot and how in the chariot, the various components of the chariot is very similar to our body. Yeah. The 5 Indriyas, the mind, the intellect, and then there is the jiva, which is riding this horse. And of course, we keep changing our chariots, like how we change our cars. And we do change our cars every 3 to 5 years. And similarly, we also change our chariots. Yeah. So what are these 5 vishayas that these horses are going to? Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, and Gandha. And with this, what are they doing? Shrotra, Tvak, Chakshus, Rasana, and Grahana. These are the sense organs, and they are moving to objects which give us Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, and Gandha experience. Yeah. So in this, if we look at our own body, we do not own any of this. Yeah, so that is something that we need to start thinking about. Next time when you sit in the car, you might think that you bought this car and you own this car. Fine, but your body, you don't own it. Then none of it you're made. Similarly, the car, none of the components of the car you're made. You're thinking that you paid some money and you got this car, but the car is made by somebody else. Similarly, this body, you don't own any component of this body. You don't own any damn thing. But still what we do, we abuse our bodies for various misdeeds, which is what Yama talks about as prayers. And he talks about Shreyas. So I'm going to pause there for 2 minutes and get folks to contribute. What is their understanding from the previous vallis that we have discussed about this concept of prayers and Shreyas? What is prayers? What is Shreyas? So who is going to take up prayers first and tell us what prayers means?
Prayers is the one that moves us away from the Lord. So any material things where you forget the Lord is prayers.
Fantastic, Pratibhaji. Yeah, very good. Excellent. That's a perfect answer. Pragnesh?
Sense organ gratification, momentary pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, they all come under prayers, and we can all, if you can all remember how our friend, our Guru Yama enticed Nachiketa, saying that I will give you 100 years, I'll give you 1,000 years, I'll give you endless lifetimes, I'll give you all these wells, I'll give you all these beautiful women, I'll give you all these beautiful instruments. You can even come to my Yamaloka and take Gandharvas with you. You can have grandchildren, great grandchildren, and you can live for eons. And I will even make you king. I can make you the a mayor of the city. I'll make you the president of a country, or I'll make you a Chakravarti. I'll make you the master of the universe, etc., etc. And then our friend Nachiketa that said, whatever you give, Yama, this is all temporary. Yeah. So that material experiences that we had that appears to give us temporary pleasures, and as Pratibhaji and Pragneshji very so rightly mentioned, all becomes prayers. So then what is Shreyas then? So then what do we do here? What is Shreyas? So Pratibhaji, do you want to come again, and then we can have, so what is your view of prayers then, Shreyas then? Pragnesh, what is
Prayers
your
is
view
the
of
one
Shreyas?
which takes us to the Lord. Anything which takes us towards the Lord is
Such
Shreyas.
as?
Such as the scriptures, the satsang, any kind of music where you're glorifying the Lord. So anything what you do thinking about your creator, the source, is Shreyas.
Wonderful, Pratibhaji. Thank you. Pragnesh, anything else you want to add in this, or anybody else, please come on board and contribute as much as you can.
From other understandings about pleasure, there are 3 layers: happiness, joy, and bliss. So here we are talking about bliss. So with the divine grace, like activities like we are currently engaging, this is real time, we are in real time Shreyas activity currently.
Excellent, Pragnesh. Yeah, so absolutely right. So Shreyas is any activity that is more focused towards the supreme. And then what are those activities? It could be, as Pratibhaji mentioned, it could be reading the scriptures, you can be listening to satsang, you can listen to kirtan, bhajan, whatever, knowledge, etc. But what does that eventually need to lead you on to? It needs to give you Nyana. It needs to give you Vairagya. And then it needs to give you bhakti. So those are the 3 essential components that eventually the path that you take that takes you to these 3. What is it? Jnana, Vairagya, and bhakti. And these 3, the routes that we take that facilitate these 3 are the Shreyas, because ultimately it boils down to this bhakti. And as Pratibhaji said, Pragnesh said, the grace. For us to get that grace, we need to first have the Nyana, then we need to get Vairagya, then we need to get Bhakti. And this is how our Guru Vedavyasa proceeds in the Brahma Sutra of the 4th Adhyaya and the 3rd Adhyaya, when he talks about all this. Sadhana Adhyaya is all about this in the 3rd Adhyaya. So he gives you a lot of explanations. So go back and do your Google searches of what Vedavyasa has to teach us on this path of Shreyas. So Yama has very, very cryptically, he has just said, this is your body. Okay, this is the body that you have. This is the chariot or the car, and you decide, mate, as a passenger, you can dictate to your driver. or as a rider, you can dictate to your charioteer as to what destination you want to take. The whole thing boils down to what you want to do, and you will do what you want to do based on what your attributes are, whatever your nature is, that you would do, and that would decide whether you go to prayers or shreyas. But look at this verse a little bit more in detail. Yeah, so when you look at it much more closely, this body of ours, yeah, this material body that we have, it can only take us to some extent, right? It only takes up to the certain extent, because we are non-material, but as non-material beings, we are using a material vehicle to take us towards a destination, but it only comes to some extent, and after that it doesn't come. It helps to some extent, but it cannot take you to Vaikuntha. Your body will not take you to Vaikuntha, because Vaikuntha is a non-material plane. You cannot take your body there. You cannot use your body. You cannot take a horse and cross a Viraja Nadi. You cannot do that. So that is why our Guru Yama puts the last line, which is very interesting there. Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam Bhokte Riti Ahur Manishina. Ultimately, what we need to do, we know this journey of souls, right? So we are the jivas, we have the linga sharira, and then you have these karmic implants, ignorance, and everything else is there. So we do our Nyana, Vairagya, and Bhakti and all that, and we start reducing our karmic imprints and start removing this ignorance and so on. So that is the path of Shreyas that we are doing. Our Shreyas path is essentially to get rid of all this ignorance and get rid of all these karmic imprints. And then what happens? This is our sadhana that we are doing. And then what happens? You get the divine grace. And then the divine grace, eventually what happens is all the previous karmas are gone. And then at one point when in the Mahapralaya happens, you will shed your linga sharira and you will cross over. So then that is your pristine state where you don't have this chariot there. Your chariot, your material covering is not there at that point. Yeah. So at that point, what happens? Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam. You become the Indriyas. You become the mind. You become the intellect. So this Jiva Swarupa itself becomes the vehicle. It becomes the intellect and the mind and the Indriyas. So these are called eternal Indriyas or the Jivas. And what does that do? Bhokte Riti Ahur Manishinaha. So this enlightened soul then enjoys the companion with the Supreme. So that is the final stage. Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam Bhokte Riti Ahur Manishinaha. But if we decide that we are going to be just stuck in prayers with all the material things, of course, we will be enjoying our material happiness and sense contact and temporary happiness. We will be going through samsara. That is also a type of Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam Bhokte Riti Ahur Manishanaha. That Atma, there is this bodily pleasure. Yeah, as you know, body has got various meanings, right? It can be this body, it can be this mind, it can be your intellect. If you stay at that level, you will be having this material happiness going round and round in samsara. Okay, so in this verse, Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi, Shariram Ratamevatu, Buddhim tu Saratim Viddhi, Manaha Pragraham Yevacha, Indriyani Hayanahu, Vishayanteshu Gocharan, Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam, Bhokte Riti Ahur Manishinaha. In those 4 lines, Yama has actually summarized the whole of Vedic philosophy. The whole of Vedic philosophy summarized in this verse, which of course Krishna has expanded further in Bhagavad Gita. And many of us will remember empty number of verses that Krishna has said about this mind and intellect and your Indriyas and the body and the sense organs, and endless conversations are there for us to contemplate. Yeah. So this is essentially the journey of souls, right? It is the journey of souls. Yeah, but as I said, none of which actually we own. We didn't make the epidermis, we didn't make the dermis, we didn't make the lungs, we didn't make the heart, we didn't make any of the organs, internal organs. We have not made anything. We are just there. And that also is by divine grace. We are lucky that we actually have a sadhana sharira to do our stuff. Yeah. So when you look at it from that perspective, yeah. So as I've said, all these, I've kind of compared and contrast with the car and stuff. And now I think I have, impressed upon you enough about the the metaphor of the car for the modern times and the metaphor of the chariot of the Vedic times. Okay, so now the question is, we said there's none of this that we own, but there is also this concept of abhimani devatas of all the things that is there in the body. Yeah. So in a car, for example, the steering wheel is made by somebody in some manufacturing company. The engine is made by somebody who is the supervisor of that. The tires are made by somebody, and every component of the car is made by somebody in some company. And of course, there is the executive director of, I don't know, BMW, who owns everything. That executive director is Brahman. Whereas all other fellows are all the demigods or the devatas that we call as abhimani devatas. Okay, so this particular verse is not to be underestimated because it immediately takes us to the concept of abhimani devata contemplation. Yama himself is an abhimani devata. What is Yama the abhimani devata of? Anybody wants to take the answer quiz here? What is Yama the abhimani devata of from Vedic perspective?
Madhuji is the Mrityu, god of death.
God of death, that is God of death, but that is correct, Padmajaji. But when you talk about Abhimani Devata, in your own body, in your Pindanda, what is he an Abhimani of? Dharma, okay. Who has a different view here?
Me, I'm saying Prana.
Prana, okay. Anybody else? So if you remember our very first class, yeah, this is 16th lecture, but in the very first lecture, we had some discussion of who this Yama is of the Vedic pantheon. We said Yama has also got another name called Dakshinapati. So why is he called Dakshinapati? Anybody wants to take a guess?
He's in charge of southern direction.
Yeah, correct. So,
Abhimani Dev.
yeah. So in the Vedic pantheon, Yama is also called
Pitruloka.
Pitruloka, yes, he is one of the Pitru Devatas. Very good. He's very important for the journey of souls. Yeah, thank you, Sudarshan. So one is Dakshinapati. He's called Dakshinapati because in the hearing, when you hear, okay, the sound comes from various directions, 8 directions. And there are, in the Vedic view, there are 8 different Devatas controlling 8 directions. And the southern direction is controlled by Yama. And Yama in your Karma Indriyas, what does he control? Anybody wants to take? Payu or Upasta? So your Vak, Pani, Padam, Payu, Upasta. Payu is Yama. So Abhimani Devata of Payu, excretion is Yama. And there comes your idea. This body is a type of excretion, Padmajaji, that you just get rid of it. Yeah, so that is how this mrityu and this payu of excretion, getting rid of unnecessary things. And Yama is in charge of payu as well. So he is an abhimani devata himself, but he is at a very lower rank. He is of course exalted, but he is at a very lower rank. And he is also talking about all the beings who are higher than him, who should also be worshipped before you want to go to the Tad Vishnoho Paramam Padam, as Yama has said, that ultimate destination that you want to do. For those of us who think that we can do this, we can get this journey alone, they are unfortunately seriously mistaken. Yeah, you cannot go and see the president in the Rashtrapati Bhavan just because I'm sitting here and I've decided that I want to go and see the president in Rashtrapati Bhavan. It doesn't happen like that. You have to get the permissions of so many other people in between before you go and see the president of the United States or the president of India. Yeah, such is the view of the Vedic pantheon as well. So there is a lot of discussion of Abhimani Devatas that comes next. And there is also the key question here is that, yes, the Shreyas and Preyas issues are there, but why are we choosing the wrong path? Why only a minority are heading in the right direction? So we need to be asking these deep fundamental questions as to why we are choosing this wrong path of prayers. Why are we not doing Shreyas? How can we apply this with my own body? Every day I sit in that car, and Yama gives us a beautiful explanation here. Sorry, let me just get this right. Yeah, this way I can see the verses. I'm sorry, apologies for this. I'm not able to get rid of it. Okay. Yastu Vijnanavan Bhavati Ayuktena Manasasata Tasya Indriyani Avashyani Dushta Ashva Ivasarate. That is the next line. Following which he says, Yastu Vijnanavan Bhavati Yuktena Manasa Sada Tasya Indriyani Vashyani Sad Ashwa Ivasarate. So he says, this body that you have, it is up to you, mate, how you control this. You can choose to follow the say of prayers, you can choose the follow of Shreyas. But then the question is, why is somebody using the following the path of prayers, but only a few minority are following the path of Shreyas? In the next two verses, Yama actually gives us a good explanation, and I'll close today's session with this slide. Yaha tu avijnanavan bhavati ayuktena manasa sada. Okay, yes tu avijnanavan bhavati, that is easy. Inadequate intellect. So that is the first. He who has inadequate intellect and cannot discriminate what he needs and what he does not need properly. Okay, that is the first problem that we have. Avijnanavan bhavati ayuktena manasa sada. This mind is not fixed. He has inadequate intellect. Because of the inadequate intellect, his mind is not fixed. Because his mind is not fixed, what is happening? Tasya indriyani avashyani. Avashyani means not under control. Vashyani means under control. Avashyani is the opposite, not under control. What is not under control? Indriyani. So for whom? Ayuktena manasasada. He who has not got his mind fixed. For him, his senses are never under control. Why is this fellow's mind not fixed? Because he has not exercised adequate intellect. Okay. So when this is happening, inadequate intellect, mind not fixed, senses not under control. So what happens in this equation? Dushta ashva iva sarate. Dushta ashva. Ashva, as you know, is horse. Dushta means wild horses. And sarate means charioteer. So this is like a charioteer being given wild horses. So that is the situation. And that is why we are all moving towards prayers is the view of Yama here. That because of that, we are going through, we just randomly, like wild horses, we are going through towards all these sense or objects. So the equation starts here: inadequate intellect, mind not fixed, senses not under control. So we are like wild horses going towards our sense objects, which is what prayers is all about. Okay, so you need to be thinking about this. And again, Krishna is repeatedly in all his chapters, again and again, he only talks about this, right? Intellect, mind, and sense organs. This is all he talks about. Gita, as we all know, is a text on psychology because it only talks about intellect, mind, and the sense organs and the sense objects. Okay, and that is what our friend Yama has actually given in this equation. Why we are all distracted? Because we don't have an intellect, that we are not exercising our intellect properly. On the other hand, yastu vijnanavan bhavati yuktena manasa sada tasya indriyani vashyani sad ashva iva sarate. So opposites in the two verses. Yastu vijnanavan bhavati, the one that has adequate intellect. Yuktena manasa sada, the one who has fixed his mind. Tasya indriyani vashyani, for whom the mind, the senses are under control. For him, what is the situation? Sad ashwa iva sarate, that is like a trained horse, and the charioteer is sitting in a chariot with trained horse. When you have such an equation, then with your intellect, mind fixed on the supreme, your senses under control, you move this vehicle towards the supreme object, not the sense object. Yeah. So intellect, discriminative knowledge, or viveka as it's called, these are essential requirements for our path towards supreme object rather than the sense objects. Yeah, so this is very neat discrimination, and of course, as I said, Gita expands this further in so many verses. But if we don't have time to read the Gitas, at least we can memorize these 3 verses of Katha Upanishad to understand what is our constitutional position in this samsara with the body that we are carrying, or rather the body that has accommodated us, and we are just using this body in our onward journey as souls, and how we, the passenger, can actually instruct our intellect in such a way that we get our mind under control so that the sense organs are moving towards the right sense object, which is the supreme being, not the temporary things. That is the summary of what Yama is saying. But the philosophy doesn't stop here, because then in the next subsequent verses, there are some really, really amazing concepts of Abhimani Devatas. What are the sense organs? Who is the Abhimani Devata of the mind? Who is the Abhimani Devata of the intellect? So using them as gurus, getting their grace, how do we make our journey towards this Tad Vishnoho Paramam Padam? So what we will do is, in the next 1 or 2 sessions, we'll delve in this in all its glory and detail, because I think it's well worth our time. I'm actually spending this and understanding who is Rudra, who is Parvati, who is Saraswati and Bharati, who is Chaturmukha, who is Mukhya Prana, who is Lakshmi, who is Vishnu, what is the Vedic pantheon understanding of their portfolios in Pindanda, and how we can use them and their grace, because those are the ones that control this various components of this body, and how can we use that and then reach our destination. And why is it that all the Hindu temples have these various deities in various orders, and how do we approach temples and worship so that we go to that Vishnoho Paramam Padam? I think Yama will be talking to us in beautiful verses that comes up next, and what we will do is we'll deal with that next week. So in that note, I'm going to close today's session. Krishna Pranamastu, and we can take any questions.
Masudanji, namaskar, Masudanji. I have one question now. In case when we are going towards this prayers, it means the Abhimani Devatas are not happy with us. That's how it is. No, that's why we are in trouble. We get this because they are not. Though they like, they have to do it, though they don't like to do it. Is it something like that we should take it? Because they are supposed to do only good, no? The Abhimani Devatas, the Rudra and all that. But since our Jiva Swabhava is making... And one more question I have is, this Jiva Swabhava is the most subtlest. Then comes the Buddhi, then the mind. Actually, our Swabhava should be influencing the Buddhi to act something like that, right? So... will we be able to control the mind as that complete surrendering, the senses getting controlled, mind is fixed? All those look so difficult since our Swabhava, in case our Swabhava is not like that.
Yeah. So all very big questions, Pratibhaji. I'll try and do my best to answer them. So the first question of yours is quite interesting. You said, oh, so mind we know, of course, we'll deal with it next week. But we've discussed a number of times how Rudra or Shiva is the Mano Abhimani Devata. So when our mind is not under control, so what did Arjuna say? Chanchalam hi manaha Krishna pramati balavad dridam tasyaham nigraham manye vayuriva sudushkaram. So that's what he said in that verse, right? So chanchalam hi manaha Krishna. So that chancha, that constantly swaying mind, how am I going to control? What you're saying, Pratibhaji, is Shiva is not making it happen for us. And it is because of him that we are kind of getting distracted. Our mind has become chanchalam hi manaha. I hope that is how I understood this. So what I would say is, I would say the reverse. I would say, please pray to Shiva. Please pray to Rudra every day of your life. How many ever times that you can, please pray to Rudra and Shiva and ask him, please give me the strength to control this mind. Please shed your grace onto me so that my mind is under control, so that I can move my mind towards Vishnu. We all know Shiva was the greatest Vaishnava. And we request Shiva, please help us control our mind and then make our mind stable so that we are moving towards Vishnu. So that is how you pray this. Now the question is why it is not happening. Because we are not doing our job properly. We are not doing our prayers and our request for grace to the other exalted Abhimani Devatas of the Vedic pantheon. That is the formula that the Vedic Rishis have given. It's up to us to do that. So if we don't follow the formula, then what happens is, and again, Krishna talks about this as your idea of Abhimani Devatas in various components. And this is an interesting concept, not dwelt in detail. There are also Abhimani Asuras. Okay, there are also Abhimani Asuras of various Indriyas. So there is always this balance that is going on with Suras or Devatas and Asuras, the demons. Okay, so for example, in the Indriyas, our Vedic scriptures talk about this Asuraka Kalanemi. Kalanemi is a devil, is a demon who pushes jivas towards all the lust and all the material desires. So that is called Kalanemi. Okay, that there are also those kind of asuras are also described. And now if you go to Catholicism, you understand from that how did this concept of Satan comes in. Okay, the concept of Satan, who is supposed to be the devil that pushes jivas towards prayers, pushes jivas to do all the bad deeds and enjoy the material pleasures of life. So that also is there. I just wanted to introduce that, thinking about the unitary of all world religions and philosophies of these sentient beings that control various aspects. So pushing you back again. So we are not able to control our mind, not because Shiva is not doing us the favor. It is actually us not doing our jobs properly and not getting his grace. So please worship Shiva every day if you need to get your mind under control. So that is the first question. Now I've kind of forgotten what your second question already is. Can you just remind me, please?
Thank you so much, Maslow. That answered everything actually.
Okay.
I was asking was the Swabhava, the
Yeah.
Jiva
So,
Swabhava.
yes, the
Yeah,
Swabhava. The
understood.
Swabhava is a big one, Pratibhaji. Yes, the Swabhava, the very fact that we are all doing satsang means that there is some sattvika quality in our Swabhava as Jivas. If we did not have the Swabhava in our Jiva, we would not be, instructing our intellect to get up after 2:30 and get ready for satsang. Our intellect will not be then instructing the mind to listen to this. And it will not be, the mind will not be instructing to our sense organ and the eyes to listen to satsang. So we have that element of sattvika guna in us. Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you so much, Pratibhaji, for that important question. Deval, you had a question.
Thank you. So I've got two questions or points. One is, it seems to me like it's a variable or a bias. If inadequate intelligence is one of the causes that will lead to prayers, that itself is a grace of God. So in some way, this theory is slightly tautological, is one observation, because you are given that by the grace of God. And then it is then being said that, oh, you're not doing something because you've got an inadequate intelligence. So that was one point. And the second point is, in psychology, there is something called Maslow's hierarchical needs. And I don't want to bore the audience about it, but the essence of it, which is relevant to the material world, is that there is a hierarchy of progress towards spirituality. And if you don't have your basic needs met, which is food, shelter, water, whatever, you cannot progress to, and then there is love, comfort, safety, etc. And then you reach spirituality. How does that is true for the material world. So how does that fit in with this theory?
Absolutely fits in, Devalji, because if you look at Krishna himself in Gita, he said, the ones that are towards spirituality, they will sleep adequately, they'll eat adequately, and they will look after themselves and their bodies adequately. And if you look at the Satvika Rajasa and all the food and everything else, the whole thing is about that. Yeah, that everything in moderation. You need to do things that is enough for you to make your progress. You don't need to go beyond that. So the material comforts that is described, nobody says give up everything and then go sit in some cave in Himalayas. That will not work for us. What Krishna has given is a practical solution there to say, look, do the bare minimum that is required to look after your body. Yeah, but don't keep on chasing against this pleasure. You need some bare minimum. Just stick to that. Eat, don't eat more, don't eat less. Eat adequately. And if you eat sattvika food. Don't sleep too much, don't not sleep at all. Sleep adequately, because that will keep your intellect and your mind awake and in a good state. So those kind of advices are always there. So we cannot do one without the other, but it is just that the material components needs to be moderated and required to the extent that we need. The first question is more interesting, I thought, Devalji, as to if, for example, we are not exercising our intellect adequately, is that also because of the divine grace? Yes, because God can never be accused of being partial and cruel. So that is a fundamental view of all theistic schools of Vedanta, as well as theistic religions, other theistic religions as well. God cannot be accused of cruelty and partiality. So you may argue, if one person does not have adequate intellect, whereas the other person has adequate intellect, then by shedding the grace in different proportions, is God being partial to this person, but being cruel to this person? So it comes to that kind of accusation on the Supreme. So how the Vedic philosophers have addressed the problem is to say, look, it all boils down to your own inherent attributes as jivas, and all that the samsara is about is the expression of your own inherent attributes. And for the expression, the divine gives you all the facilities to make your own expression. So if you are that jiva who is so shrouded with ignorance and has so much of tamasic nature as your inherent attributes, God does not change your tamasic attributes to sattvic attributes, because that would mean that the jivas are destroyed and new jivas are created. That is not what God does. God never creates jivas. Jivas are unborn and eternal is the fundamental view of Vedanta. So all that God does is he allows the jivas to play out their own your attributes. So Duryodhana does one particular thing in Mahabharata, whereas Bhima does something else in Mahabharata, because that one is the extreme tamasic, Bhima is the extreme sattvic, and they do express their own views here. So all the divine does is gives them facilities to act out. So it fundamentally boils down to the attributes of the jiva, which itself is a controversial topic among various schools of Vedanta and also Catholicism and other religions. So you could debate this, but I think by grace, I think what you mean is that the divine has given the facilities and provisions for the jivas to explore and express their own attributes. So if there was a very sattvic jiva, he will eventually fix his intellect. He will fix his mind. He will go towards Shreyas. He will attain his salvation. So in that sense, some schools of Vedanta think about the predestination of souls. So this is a controversial topic. Some view that all souls are deserving of moksha, and some view that there are gradations and some souls are eligible, some souls are not. And of course, there is also one view that there is no souls. We are all Brahman. Yeah. So there are three strands about this. So you need to make your own ideas about that. I am of the firm view that God gives the provision for jivas to play out their attributes. And that explains the variety of people that you see outside you. Yeah. At the end of the day, philosophy is about, it should be based on experience. Yeah. So experience should be the foundation for philosophy. And if we don't use experience and we just theorize all sorts of things, it doesn't take us anywhere. What you see outside is what the philosophy is all about and should be about, not something airy-fairy utopian philosophy. So if you take that view, there is democracy in souls. There are different types of souls. Some go to hell, some go to Swarga. Easy. And some of us will be in Nitya Samsara here, constantly going through Samsara. So that is how I thought I would explain your question, and I hope it made sense. Harish.
Yeah, so I had I think it's a little bit of a clarification of the fourth shloka. So is the bhokta mentioned there the same as the pibanto in the, when we say the tam pibanto, and then in that metaphor of the chariot, who is the other person who's there? Who's the other enjoyer? If that makes sense.
That's very well put, Harish. So it depends on what levels of contemplation you want to take to. Yes, the bhokta primarily in that verse, Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam Bhokta Riti Ahur Manishinaha. So that fourth line, that Bhokta Iti Ahuhu Manishinaha. Watch that last word, Manishinaha. Yeah. What does Bhokta and is qualified with Manishinaha. Manishinaha means what? Manishi. Manisha means Manusha. Manusha means Manana Shilaha. Yeah. So Manana Shilaha is called Manishi. Manishinaha. And that is why the Manishinaha becomes Manushas. So Manana Shilaha means what? Us. We are capable of manana and thinking and making rational decisions. Yeah. So Manana Shilaha. So where there Yama has said Bhokta Riti Manishinaha, there it means the Jiva, of course. But then the higher level of interpretation, as you say, is that Bhokta of Jiva is also dependent on the Supreme. And as we have discussed in the previous sections, 1/10 only is given to the Jivas, but the 9/10 is taken up, the good deeds are taken up by the Supreme in the Ritam Pibanta. Thanks, Harish.
No, got it. Thank
you. Hello, Madhu.
Yes.
I have, going back to Deval's question and about the intellectual disability things, it also depends. I heard all what you said, excellent explanation. I was just also thinking it depends on three things, isn't it? Jiva Swabhava, Anadi Karma, and Prayatna. What determines how they are currently. So it's not like the grace, or it also, of course, grace by taking these three things into consideration. Is that right? So that is how it is determined. So what they achieve, what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Neetaji, for putting in that contribution, because absolutely what you said is right. What I was trying to do is the basic equation there is Jiva Swabhava, but of course, from Jiva Swabhava, only influences the type of karmas that you do. And the type of karmas that you do eventually dictates the type of prayatna that you do in your daily life. So they're kind of interdependent, but the core there is the Jiva Swabhava, and Purushakya Prayatna, Anadi Karma, they come in, and these three equations are taken into consideration where the divine provides that facility for Jivas to act out. Beautifully put, Neetaji, 100%. Yeah. And in that Purushakya Prayatna, of course, you have the Swabhava and the Prabhava that influences. Prabhava is key there, right? Prabhava is the environment in which you are operating, the genetics of your body, the environment, the socio-cultural milieu in which you are operating, that is then contributes also, influences your Prayatna also. So all those things become important. It's a complex topic. I agree. It is not a simple linear equation here. There are layers and layers of complexities here. And maybe all that we are trying to do here is trying to dissect it to some extent and understand how complex it is. Thanks, Neeta. Harish.
Oh, no, that was an old one. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Fantastic. So if there are no further questions, Harish, can you take us through Om and then close today's session?
Yeah. Om.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So we'll meet up next Sunday where we will carry on with this amazing discussions of all the Abhimani Devatas. So if you want to know about who Rudra is of the Vedas, who Saraswati is of the Vedas, who Ganesha is, Subramanya is, and so on, join us next Sunday. So we'll have a whole-scale discussion of these concepts of Vedic Pantheon. Okay. On Krishna Pranamastu. See you next week. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.